Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Ethereum, the butterfly effect, part 2. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, we put out a video called Ethereum, the butterfly effect, a few months ago, right? And I want to talk about it because up until now, it generally is playing out, right? And I can't promise you that it's going to play out the entire way, but whenever you put out these predictions and it starts to play out, it's at least worthwhile to follow through in case that is the way this ultimately transpires by the end of the cycle. Now, I honestly have never been, the biggest fan of Elliott wave analysis, primarily because it could be due to my own ignorance of it, honestly. Um, but I do feel like Elliott waves can be kind of hand wavy, and you can always sort of redraw the waves to fit the bias. But in defense of Elliott wave theory, you can basically do that with any type of technical analysis, right? You can always redraw trend lines, etc. Okay, so with that said, everything's a bit hand wavy. The only thing in technical analysis that I think is truly powerful is momentum. Momentum is really powerful, and what you can take from that is assets that are trending up are more likely to trend up than assets that are not. And so what ends up happening, a lot of people will trade the asset they have that's doing well for an asset that's not. But usually what ends up happening is the one they had continues to do well, and the asset that was lower that they thought was going to go up next continues to stay low. And so momentum normally leads to just more price action to the upside if the momentum is going up, or if it's down, it's the reverse, right? So momentum is pretty powerful. Everything else, it's your own. Pick your cup of tea, right? But in this case, we put out this video on Ethereum called the butterfly effect, and it's essentially based around this idea of this pattern: X to A, B, C, D, and then the bear market, right? Now, what's really interesting about it is that, I did this video a few months ago, but I've actually been talking about it in other videos well before that. I remember talking about this in ITC Premium, probably 2 years ago. I don't remember exactly when, but uh, it it seems like it's potentially playing out. And I wanna go over kind of what would be some of the expectations if it continues to play out. You know, what might you see along the way that could throw you off? But let's take a look at it. So, and by the way, you can see the path here. Like, here's X, A, B, C, right? We hadn't gone to C, but now we have. And then D, and then obviously no one's going to want to talk about the blue line, which is potentially the bear market year of 2026, but we'll talk about it a little bit in this video. But honestly, it's not the primary focus at this time. It might become the primary focus in 6 months, but it's not really the primary focus at this time. So, going over to the chart, the butterfly effect. It uses this chart here. This is the butterfly harmonic. I'm calling it the butterfly effect, right? But this is a butterfly harmonic. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this a little bit transparent so we can kind of see through it. So we're not, but so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. All right. So we're going to go up here, and we're going to find that tool. I think it's this one right here. And we're going to go X to A. And then we're going to go all the way up to B, right? Now, B could be this one, or it could be this one. Whatever, right? Whatever you want to choose. Let's just choose the first one. We can always change it later if it fits our bias a little bit more. And then we'll go down to C. And then D. So where is D? So D is 1.618 from B to D, right? So that could be, I gotta come over here, right? 1.618 would be about 5,700, right? That's where the 1.618 is. You can also see from X to D, right? X to D, you have similar idea, like 1.272, 1.618, right? So the point here that I'm trying to make is that you have this chart that kind of lines up, right? The 0.786 pretty close to this 0.802. If you just take it down to sort of like the a little bit lower in the wick, you can see it was at 0.786, pretty close to it. Also, you know, if you don't take the wick down there, but if you take candles instead, it would honestly be a little bit closer. But we're just going to go with price, you know, lowest price, highest price, etc. So this kind of matches, right? Like this kind of matches. And then from B to C, right? From B to C, and basically A to C, the idea is that it could go all the way down to as low as 0.886 and still be the butterfly harmonic. And you can see that it went down to about 0.844. Okay, so this kind of seems the same. So you have, this is the same. This is basically the same. And again, this basically means it could be as low as 0.382 or as low as 0.886, right? It's a range. And what's really interesting is Ethereum tried every step of the way, right? The first C all the way up here arguably was that 0.382 effort. And then it tried again a little bit lower, you know, and then it tried again a little bit lower. And the whole idea is that Ethereum was struggling to break through 4K, right? Struggling to break through 4K. But the idea is that it tries to break through, it can't, it goes lower, finds more buyers. And then it tries to break through, it can't, it goes lower to find more buyers. And then it tries to break through again, it can't, goes lower to find more buyers. But in this case, when it went lower to find more buyers, guess what happened? Ethereum went home, right? Ethereum went home. And that's a big deal because when it goes home, that's normally around the time that ETH Bitcoin bottoms, all right? So far, this is playing out. Now, if you look at the video, I don't remember exactly where I drew it out, right? The whole idea. Let's see if I can find it. But I'm just scrolling through over here to see if I can find where yeah. So like here, this was the idea, right? This was the idea. You go down, you go all the way up, and then you drop into the bear market year. Now, this has almost perfectly played out right now, right? I mean, it dropped, it went home, and now you're getting this crazy rally that who knows exactly how high it'll go before it'll stop. But the question ultimately is, will it put in a new all-time high, right? Will it put in a new all-time high or not? You know, honestly, I can't know the answer to that, but I hope that it does, right? I hope that it does, because I think it would sort of put a bow on the cycle if Ethereum does get a nice rally up to those all-time highs, and it would make the cycle feel a bit more complete, right? It's always felt like the cycle was missing something because you've had Bitcoin, you know, just putting in new all-time highs, but you haven't really had the same thing for Ethereum, and a lot of people were giving up over here. But I think the ultimate thing that needed to happen was it just simply needed to go home, and ETH Bitcoin needed to bottom, and once that happened, then you hopefully have enough momentum for this thing to break through. I said in that video, or it could have been the one where I was comparing it to the 1989 to 1990 S&P fractal, that the next time that Ethereum gets to 4K, it should break through, right? So I don't know exactly when that's going to be, whether it's going to be next week or 3 to 4 months from now. I don't know. But the next time that Ethereum gets to 4K, I would say there's a really high chance that it will, in fact, break through. So the general idea, though, with this chart is that you have your bear market year. You kind of have this impulsive retrace. Then you have the macro higher low, right? The macro higher low. Then you have the rally, potentially, to new all-time highs. And then you get your bear market, which likely takes Ethereum back down to the regression band. Now, obviously, if you look at this blue line, you can see it technically goes lower than A, but I don't know how important that is. Like, I don't know that it has to. I mean, obviously, maybe if there was no intervention by the Fed and no money printing, perhaps that would play out. But what I would say, what's been my base case for a while, is that after Ethereum goes home, it can get a rally to all-time highs, but it will likely return back to the regression band in 2026, right? In 2026. And my guess is that it will spend more time in the regression band in 2026 than it did in than it did this cycle, right? So I think I'll spend more time. And if you look at sort of like last cycle, Ethereum spent a lot of time in the regression band, but the cycle before that, it didn't really spend a lot of time in the regression band, right? So I kind of think that it could do something similar, right? Where this cycle, it didn't really spend a whole lot of time in the regression band, but next cycle, it probably will, right? It'll probably spend, a good portion of its time like in that range, but it doesn't mean it can't go to new all-time highs first and then come back down for the 2026 bear market, the midterm year, and then just sort of slowly work its way off of that and build towards the next bull market. So this has been a long-term view. I understand how it could be frustrating for either side, right? Like if you're bullish and you wanna see it go to new all-time highs like me, it can be frustrating to see a pattern where it ultimately has to sell off, right? But again, I will remind you, all this technical analysis is hand wavy. Use it to get what you need to make money in the market. Don't marry a single indicator. My point is that I did a video on this called the butterfly effect, and over 120,000 people watched it, right? You can see it's 122,000 views. So, and I saw a comment recently saying, hey, can you do a part 2? So here we are, part 2. This is played out, right? Down, up, down. Now, will it be that easy, right? Will it be that easy? Maybe it's just that easy. There could also be some hiccups along the way, right? There's no guarantee that it plays out in the exact same manner. This over here continues to look familiar, right? Like the drop to the regression band and then back up, right? Kind of the same thing, right? The drop and then back up. Like it kind of seems like we're right here, right? That's where it kind of seems like we are. If you look at that cycle, if you look at the cycle, last cycle, you could argue that we went through this phase as well, right? Where it goes down and then back up. But what do you notice? There was a hiccup, right? We got the recession of the pandemic. So you always have to remember that curveballs can always come your way, right? Like there's no guarantee that it plays out exactly like that. It probably won't play out exactly like this either. But my point is to say that I would assume that there will be a curveball at some point, right? And I don't know exactly when, but one of the things I would look at, and by the way, I mean, this rally here was earlier in the year, right? So this was March. This one here is July. So it's almost like we're already, in terms of seasonality, that is where we are, right? This is July of 2017. This is July of 2025. So one potential thing that I could see happening, and I again, I'm not asking you to, to panic, sell, or anything like that in case this happens, right? But one thing that I could see happening is potentially, and I don't want to say for sure, but you might see a retest of the bull market support band, uh, and maybe even a wick below it before you get a run up to all-time highs. Now, one of the reasons I say that is because one of the things we used to add a confluence to this idea of the butterfly effect is we used the fractal by the S&P 500 from 1989 to 1990. Now, that might sound kind of weird, but ultimately it was a very similar pattern. I got a lot of flack for it on Twitter. People said there's no way that Ethereum could drop that low and Bitcoin's bull market continue on, and that's exactly what happened, right? Ethereum went home and Bitcoin's bull market continued. A lot of people failed to understand, just how these cycles work and how, altcoins in general will underperform Bitcoin for so long. And because they misunderstand that idea, and they completely misunderstand Bitcoin dominance, for them, there was no way Ethereum could go all the way down to 1,300 and the Bitcoin bull market remain intact. But that's exactly what happened, right? Ethereum went all the way down here in the post-halving year, and now it's showing a fairly quick recovery. But one of the things you can do is if you take and maybe I'll do a whole video on this just for completeness, because this is also played out. If you look at this fractal here for the S&P, and we just sort of copy it over to Ethereum, you can see it's almost a perfect match, right? You essentially have, and we'll try to get this to match up a little bit better, right? But yeah, you essentially have this pattern that's almost perfectly played out, right? And look, a lot of people told me how crazy it was to look at these patterns from 1989 to 1990, but that looks pretty good to me, I mean, and look, I can't know for sure if the whole thing's going to play out, and I don't know exactly how to draw it to make it as accurate as possible, but there's a lot of similarities, right? I mean, even down to sort of like this drop right here, right? Like you get your first peak, your second peak, your third peak, you drop all the way down, you get this impulsive move back up, sell off, and then back up. And now we're potentially in this zone right here. Right? So, and what's interesting is if you look at it like this, you can see that it basically rallied all the way up to 5,000 to 6,000. Now, the reason why that's interesting is because that was essentially, where the butterfly harmonic had it going, right? Around that $5,000 to $6,000 level. So I find it interesting just how similar it's all played out, right? And I know, I mean, it sounded crazy back then to consider this idea, but here we are, right? Here we are, and the butterfly effect seems to be in full swing. The other thing to remember as to why this could theoretically make sense is that this D, like once it hits the all-time high, like whenever it hits the market cycle top, if you think of it in terms of timing, when do the market cycles normally end? Then the market cycles normally end, for Bitcoin, they normally end in the post-halving year, which would be later this year. But for Ethereum, they can also end in the post-halving year, but there's also examples where it continues up until early midterm year, right? Like it's like in the 2017 cycle, Ethereum went all the way up into early 2018, right? It was all the way up into 2018. So when I look at this chart, there's a couple of ways it could play out. The preferred way at this point for me would just be to keep on going up and to break out, right? And if it does that, then you probably would see a rotation back to Bitcoin for a month or two, and then maybe another rotation back to alts before everything's over. But if you're looking at like seasonality, right? If it's July and we're here, then maybe it runs into late August and then gets another pullback, and then perhaps it gets even another move up after that. That's what happened in 2017. We just completely missed out on this bigger rally here because we were kind of going through the tariff tantrum, and we were having to send ETH home at a time where it normally doesn't have to because it already went home. So my guess, my hope, is that in the next 6 months, Ethereum will hit new all-time highs, right? You could you could have a scenario where it stalls out at around the prior all-time highs for a little while before breaking through as well. And that could be when liquidity perhaps goes back to Bitcoin more so. The other thing as well to remember is that the seasonality for Ethereum, I don't get the sense that seasonality is playing out this way in the similar fashion, because like seasonality is all over the place. Like April was a low for Ethereum, but in 2017, the pullback in April was almost nothing. So it's very, very different than what it was then. And so I don't want to put too much faith in seasonality, but you can see that even on these rallies, there were plenty of drops back to the bull market support band, right, before going back up. Right, so just a consideration to think about, and that could obviously throw people off if we get that. Again, like there's some type of negative seasonality in Q3. In the last couple of years, that seasonality has played out in August and September, for the most part, right? Like if you look at 2022, you can see that the market found a local top in mid-August and then dropped into September. And then in 2023, you can see that the market dropped in August, September, and then in 2024, right? Same thing, August and September. So there could be a curveball coming our way in that August to September timeframe, which might make the fractal diverge a little bit. But to me, this seems like it's playing out for the most part, right? Like I can't see it in easily in a different way, because this fractal that we talked about has almost perfectly played out, right? Really, like it has. It's almost the exact same thing, right? Almost the exact same thing. So hopefully it keeps on going, right? And then the butterfly effect continues to play out. So I think, as I've said, I think that for this market cycle, I think that ETH bottomed against Bitcoin, right? For this market cycle. And now we are either here or somewhere like here, right? Like where it basically gets this move up. At some point you get a larger correction and then it goes again, right? So the next large correction by ETH Bitcoin, whenever that might be, my guess is that you see a larger drop by ETH, and not to a lower low, a higher low. My guess is that it would probably correspond to about like September, October timeframe, would be my guess. And in that drop by ETH Bitcoin, that could actually send all Bitcoin pairs to those range lows that we've talked about, right? And then that would sort of complete the puzzle, right? Get those alt Bitcoin pairs down here. ETH Bitcoin puts in a higher low when that happens. But to me, the butterfly effect looks like it's playing out. You know, could there be something in the second half of 2025 that throws us off? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, last cycle I remember following this pattern, right? I remember following sort of this pattern here, up, and then we got the pandemic, right? We got a recession, right? So that would be the thing that could throw us off. But also, we're not really seeing recessionary numbers at the exact time. Like, we're seeing initial claims are still coming in really low. The unemployment rate is still really low. So just keep in mind, like, there's always going to be something that, you know, potentially could throw things off for a little bit. But even in that case, it doesn't mean that the market can't recover and still play out that butterfly effect video, right? But you can see that Ethereum did in fact go home. I have, just for completeness, like, I have had some people say, well, will it ever go to the lower part of the regression band, right? Will it ever go there? You can see that in the 2018 cycle, it did eventually go there, but it took a while, right? I mean, it hit the fair value, rallied up for a while, then it dropped to the lower regression band, right? So it's certainly possible that we go to the lower regression band, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen immediately, right? I mean, and by the time we hit it, I mean, maybe it'll be next year for all I know. I feel like the only way for something as bad as that to happen this year, you would have to have a really, really bad macro print, right? Like something completely out of the blue, that sends the unemployment. I mean, you have to have like a pandemic style shock to the market for that to happen. And, you know, what I've learned is that it's, you know, you don't, you know, constantly worrying about that stuff isn't necessarily the best thing to do, because usually markets go up. Yes, occasionally they'll get those drops, but it's not something you should spend a lot of your time worrying about, right? Like in this rally by Ethereum here up, I don't think anyone knew that it was going to collapse like that, and it did, but then it just still recovered back up, right? So, you know, when I look at a chart like this, you know, it kind of looks like you have your impulsive move off the fair value, right? You have your impulsive move here off the fair value. Same thing over here. At some point, you'll sort of stall out for a little bit, and then hopefully continue to run. If we do get some type of shock, then remember there's a few more levers that they're going to pull, right? They could always end quantitative tightening. They could always lower interest rates. But this is what I'm looking at. And the final thing that I think that people are going to want to know is this D portion, like, you know, where it potentially collapses in the midterm year. What would cause that? Like, what would cause that final collapse? And my guess is that the narrative for next year, for 2026, that will accompany that drop will likely be, you know, the tariffs finally, you know, having inflationary pressures that build up, the unemployment rate potentially starting to climb higher, as well. So I think that will finally evolve in 2026. So I think that will be the narrative that accompanies the 2026 bear market, right? But that doesn't mean there's not runway between now and then. Okay. So keep that in mind. Oh, by the way, the one last thing, the shock that I think will happen at some point, and I don't think it has to be immediate. It certainly does not. Is that I think that something needs to happen to allow all Bitcoin pairs to go to the range lows, right? I think that will happen. But Ethereum's not part of total 3. If you look at total 2 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, you can see that it already got kind of close. It got closer to the range lows, right? But in order for it to make that final move down, I think that you need something to allow that liquidity to flow from alts back to Bitcoin. And I don't know exactly when that's going to occur. My guess is that it occurs in sometime in Q3 going into potentially early Q4, right? Or even late October, right? Late October. Because again, like if you look at all Bitcoin pairs, even in 2017, they were at 0.25 in late October, early November. So I think you're going to have something that potentially causes that to occur. I mean, these could go up higher first and then drop, and then you get hopefully a larger move off of the range lows. But those are my views. And hopefully we'll see this Ethereum butterfly effect idea play out, where it just simply goes to all-time highs. And if it does, and if at some point in the next 6 months we're sitting here and the price is 5 to 6K, and we're looking at this, I'm gonna make a part 3, and I don't want you guys to get mad, right? That'll just be the next step of the bear market year. But again, that's hopefully half a year away. Might not be quite half a year, but hopefully half a year away. Just know that we had a part 1, we had a part 2. Part 1 was the bearish outlook, and that played out. It went home. Ethereum went home. Part 2 is a follow-up and saying, look, we went home, and now we're getting this rally, hopefully to new all-time highs. There might be a part 3 between now and then if there's a big shock and you see a big drop by all Bitcoin pairs to the range lows. I might make a part 3 before potentially a final part 4 at the beginning of 2026. But this is how I see it playing out, right? Where you do get an all-time high by Ethereum before a larger drop in the midterm year of 2026. That would seem to make the most amount of sense to me. And also the other thing to consider is a lot of the bull markets by Bitcoin, like they tend to end in the post-halving year, and so that larger drop for Ethereum would likely also correspond to a larger drop by Bitcoin, right? About every 4 years or so, you get these bear markets, right? Your 4-year cycle bear market, and so my guess is that you're going to have another one out in 2026. And then that drop by Bitcoin will likely be that D drop down by Ethereum. Okay, so if you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.